Welcome to the Less Stressed Lawyer Show.
Hello and welcome back to the Less Stressed Lawyer Show with Miss Olivia Vizzacaro. Olivia is a former attorney turned life and business coach for lawyers. She helps ambitious attorneys stop overthinking, set boundaries, and take bold action so they can build a practice and a life they actually love. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about what it really means to redefine success. Olivia will go through how lawyers can start measuring progress by fulfillment and freedom, not just titles or billable hours. Olivia, my dear, welcome back.
So good to see you, Evan. How are you?
Oh, well, good to see you as well. Miss Olivia, the legal profession tends to have a very narrow picture of success. What does that traditional version usually look like?
It looks like really only taking work into consideration. So you're measuring it by whether it's billable hours or your income or your job title, maybe the name of the firm that you work at. But we're looking at those sort of vanity metrics rather than how you feel doing your job. And we'll also look at things like winning cases or closing a deal instead of really celebrating the success of just going through the motions of everyday lawyer life. But people really fail to consider anything outside of their career as part of their definition of success. And we talk about work-life balance a lot. And when we think about it in that way, it breaks our lives into these two categories. It's like work and then everything else. And I really like people to think about it more comprehensively, where work is one part of our life, but we have a lot of different parts: our relationships with people, our financial health and success, our physical health and success, fun and recreation, things like that. So you want to start to not look at it so narrowly and give yourself permission to envision what might success or at least enjoyment look like outside of just work.
When lawyers hit all those benchmarks but still feel unsatisfied, what's really going on beneath the surface, in your opinion?
I think one of the issues is that they're hitting those benchmarks either because they were told to or to impress other people. So they're operating from external pressure instead of internal desire. And whenever you're setting a goal, you really want to check in with yourself and say, do I want this for me? What are my reasons for desiring this? Do I like those reasons? Do they feel in alignment and in integrity with who I am and what I prefer? Or am I chasing something because I think it's the right thing to chase? So a lot of those, again, vanity metrics about money or number of hours or the job title you have, it doesn't really align with what people want, but they don't ever really check in with themselves to figure out what they want. So that begins to just stay elusive for them.
How do external expectations from, firms, clients, or even family shape the way lawyers define success for themselves?
So I think they start with just believing those are the right things to strive or aim for because someone else, probably in a position of authority, gave them those standards, metrics, and bars to strive for. And what you're seeing here is they get an external expectation, but they haven't made up their own mind on what their internal expectations are. So you've got a rubric basically that someone else handed you, and then you're undecided. So because you have that rubric from someone, that tends to fill the space, and then you never figure out what you want for yourself. So you just focus all of your time and energy on striving for those things rather than checking in with yourself and saying, is this what I actually want? Is this what I would like my life to look like? Is this how I want to feel in my day-to-day? A lot of those external expectations focus on growth for the sake of growth. And one of the things that I'm seeing with my clients as of late is we're checking in and saying, does growth actually make sense for me? Because I could strive to do an extra $500,000 in revenue this year, but if it requires me to hire team members and I don't like how that feels, that creates extra pressure having to financially provide for someone else. Or, yeah, I could bill more hours this year, but then I don't get to spend as much time with my kids. We're really questioning, does growth make sense for what you want? And when you're just using that other rubric, you're never really having those conversations with yourself.
What are some common beliefs you see lawyers holding on about success that, keep them feeling trapped or maybe feeling inadequate?
So a big one is just how they define prestige. I know when I was getting started and I was working in big law, I defined prestige as the name of the firm that I worked for and the amount of money that I was making. And when I decided to leave the practice of law and start my own business, rather than saying, oh, I no longer care about prestige, I really went through a more intentional process where I redefined what prestige meant to me. So now I can work from anywhere in the world if I choose to. I'm not tied to a jurisdiction that I'm licensed in. And I also have unlimited earning potential as an entrepreneur. And those things, also being able to set my schedule and work the hours that I want. I still work plenty, but being able to not take calls before a certain time, all of that freedom became really prestigious to me. So I think that's one thing that they need to check in with. The other thing that I used to be guilty of as well was having the belief that more is better. And I've really changed that thought process and replaced it with more is just more. So working more hours doesn't mean that you're doing a better job or that you're more impressive. It just means you're working more hours, making more money. Again, considering what is required of you in order to bring that money in, it's just more effort, more time, especially if you're in a billable hour model. So you want to figure out if more actually is better, or maybe it's not. So challenging that belief really helps too.
Well, what about someone who wants to set a new definition? Where's the best place to start internally or practically?
So this is going to sound kind of funny, but I actually find it's super effective. Most attorneys have a really hard time answering the question, what is it that you want for your life? And I think in part that's because once you make the decision to go to law school, so many decisions are made for you. And there's just a follow the yellow brick road path that you start to embark on, and you're on it for a while. So when you finally get to the point where you run out of paved road, as I like to think of it, you're not really skilled at asking yourself that question and forcing yourself to come up with an answer that feels really honest and in alignment for you. So I often ask people to look around and to see what they envy in other people. And I start by having them create what I call an envy list. And if you look at someone and you're like, oh, that person took a month off in the middle of their year, like I could never do that, but that would be so incredible if I could. It's like, okay, let's add that to the list and figure out why you think that's not available to you and what changes you would need to make in order to be able to create that for yourself. If you envy someone who's able to pick their kids up from school rather than needing a different caregiver to do that for you, then add that to the envy list and let's figure out why you think you can't do it and what needs to change in order to make that possible. And this isn't to say that you're not allowed to also want some of those metrics I talked about earlier, a certain income, a certain job title. You just want to know and like your reasons for wanting those things. So check in with yourself, ask yourself, what is it that I want? And what we tend to do is we'll feel confused and then we'll distract ourselves. We won't force us to answer the question. And a lot of people will tell themselves, I just don't know. And I believe that we always know what we want. We just have to create a distraction-free environment and allow ourselves to come up with an answer.
So how can lawyers kind of experiment with new goals or those priorities without feeling like they're throwing away everything they've built and all the time they spent?
So this is definitely a big concern that I see my clients struggle with. And this tends to come from all or nothing thinking. So we'll think that drastic change is the better change. This has got a tinge of perfectionism to it, but we'll want to make like a big sweeping overhaul. And normally that triggers such discomfort for people because it's such a dramatic shift from the way that they've operated before that they start to dip their toe in and then they freak out because it's so different from what they've been doing previously, and they'll just abandon the plan and go back to doing what they're used to doing. So I really recommend with starting very small and making tiny changes to create some safety that the world's not going to come to a screeching halt if you start to maybe create some boundaries or determine that there are certain times that you do work and certain times that you don't work. So this might look like 6 to 8 at night, you don't take work calls or you don't check email, you have dinner with your family. Or a portion of your weekend that you specifically don't work and you spend time doing something that you enjoy. Or if you didn't take any vacation time last year because you kept waiting for work to slow down, picking 1 week this year, you don't have to go on a European excursion for 2 or 3 weeks, but just start small. Same thing with if you want to work less, you don't need to go from full-time or part-time, but working a few hours less a week might have a really big impact. So figure out, what do you think would move the dial a little bit and feel better as you're going through your day-to-day life? And then what's the smallest way to implement that change?
Mm. We've talked about this in other episodes though, but what role does comparison play in keeping lawyers stuck in other people's definitions of success?
So there's two ways that you can leverage comparison. One way is going to be super negative, and that's what we've talked about before, where you're really engaging in what we call comparing and despairing. So you're measuring yourself against someone else and having a really negative thought process as you go about doing that. So it's like, I don't understand why they have that and I can't. They have something that I don't have, or that looks impressive to me, but that's not available to me. And you're really limiting your opportunity and what's possible for you based on those comparisons that you're making. So you're really weaponizing someone else's success against yourself. And the better way to leverage comparison is to look for people who have the things that you want to have. And instead of saying, that's not available to me, I just don't have what it takes to have what they've created, you want to figure out and get very specific. What have they done? I like to look for three things. What thoughts are they thinking? They might have different beliefs than I have. They might have a different way to view something than I do. So I might want to steal the way that they think about something, borrow their beliefs. They're also likely willing to feel uncomfortable emotions that you've been avoiding. So what negative emotions do I think they might be willing to gag and go through in order to have that result that I'm desiring myself? What if I was willing to feel those negative emotions too and take intentional action in spite of those feelings? And then the third category is, what actions are they taking that I'm not taking? For me, when I was starting out with business development, I was tempted to indulge in that compare and despair, but instead I started looking at people who are a little bit further along than me and asked myself, what are they thinking that I'm not? What are they willing to feel that I'm not? What are they doing? And I made a little blueprint for myself. And I just decided to experiment. What if I practiced these thoughts, worked on gagging and going through these emotions, and took these actions and basically followed the plan that they've followed, and see what happens? And lo and behold, it's not rocket science. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. If we work that playbook, we'll get the same results. So that's my recommendation for people. If you're stuck in comparing in a way that doesn't serve you, there's a way to compare that does serve you. So notice it and then switch to that.
So can you share a story of a client who you redefined success on their own terms and how that changed both their work and their personal life?
For sure. So I've seen it in two pretty significant ways. Two clients really jump out to me. One is an attorney deciding, like, do I really want to make partner? And obviously, that's the very common law firm path for most attorneys. You're starting out as an associate and it feels very desirable. It's what you're supposed to want. But we looked at the different aspects of the role of a partner in the firm that she worked at. And she really loved doing the legal work, but didn't really enjoy making high-level strategy decisions. She wanted to work with people who still had more experience than her. So figuring out, do I like what this role requires of me? And part of the answer can be no, but I want to learn how to grow into it. So maybe it doesn't mean no partnership ever, but slowing down in order to build my confidence and change my expectations for myself first. So when I finally go out for that position, it can feel like a much better experience, a much more enjoyable experience, because you're not so uncomfortable with the things that you're doing. And then I've had another client who was really pursuing growth for the sake of growth. So hiring a team pretty quickly, growing faster than like her cash flow could kind of keep up with. And it created a lot of panic and pressure. And she went through a full year of feeling like she was cash strapped, all for the sake of just hitting revenue mile markers as quickly as she could. And we really started to question that. And we're making decisions when we're setting goals based off of incomplete information. So you think you know what your experience is going to be like, but it's really important to check in with yourself and say, hey, do I like how this is going now that I'm in it? Do I like how I feel as I'm pursuing this goal? Does the pace feel right for me? We tend to judge slowing down like it's a moral failing or that we're not doing it the right way. But it might make a lot more sense to pursue a goal more slowly, but in a way that doesn't trigger your nervous system or have you in a panic about covering expenses and overhead and things like that. So we started to slow down her pursuit of her goals, and she's still on track to hit them, but not at the pace that she was pursuing them originally, and creating some metrics to pay attention to so she doesn't get ahead of herself in the future, because that's kind of her tendency to run as fast as possible in the pursuit of those goals. So we're changing the way she pursues them in a way that feels a lot more like consensual and in alignment with the life she wants to live, so she doesn't have to feel stressed all the time.
And for a lawyer listening who's realizing their current definition of success isn't working, what's one specific question they can ask themselves today to start defining what success actually means to them?
So this is going to sound a little, I don't know, wooey, I guess, because people don't like to, I don't know, be super creative, because again, we're so focused on the career aspect of it. And normally my people are pretty practical and they're like, that's not available to me, Olivia. I can't do that. But I really do think this question is helpful. If you could design it from scratch, your life, your career, your life outside of work, if you could design it from scratch, you weren't going off of an existing model, which is what we typically do when we enter the workforce. What would you design it to look like? And from there, just let yourself come up with some answers. Don't judge them. You don't have to tell anyone else what it looks like. But what I love to do is answer rhetorical questions really honestly and sincerely. So a lot of people, if they're feeling like the traditional version of success isn't hitting the way they thought it would hit, and it doesn't feel as good as they thought it would feel, just giving yourself permission to reinvent the wheel and see what comes up. And you'll be surprised. You might say something like, God, I wish I worked half as much. And then you might be like, oh, I'm lazy. I'm judging myself for that. And I should want to work harder and I should want to be more successful. You don't have to tell anyone about what your answer is for what you want, but just see what comes up. And then you can start to see the roadblocks or obstacles that get in your way. You might say, I want to work half as much, but I can't afford to take a 50% pay cut. Okay, now we just have a higher quality problem to solve. So how could you create a work life where you're able to work significantly less, but not make significantly less? And you can start by doing research into business models, what your rates would need to be, maybe the types of matters you would work on, the cases that you would take in order to achieve that. Same thing with anything in your personal life. So if you want to, I have a client right now, one of her goals is to spend a lot more time with her aging parents and figuring out what would that look like? What frequency would you want to visit them if they live out of state? What would your income need to be in order to make that really easy? What decisions would you need to make with work in order to create space for you to do something like that? So if you could create it all from scratch, what would you create? And then see what comes up.
Awesome. Thank you, Miss Olivia.
My pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of the Less Stressed Lawyer Show. If you're ready to stop overthinking and start making bold moves in your life and your practice, visit oliviavizacaro.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review so more lawyers can find the strategies they need. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.